2 weeks ago, on October the 6th, was the feast of Francis of Assisi. And we have the privilege today of being able to celebrate the blessing of animals. And I am so grateful for those of you who have brought your animals and that we will get to share in that together. I know that not all pets are able to come to the church and endure through a church service when all these adults are and doing whatever it is that we do. But the real treasure and wisdom of the life of Francis Assisi was other than his great reputation for living in harmony with the natural world and with animals. And I want to tell you an abbreviated version of his story. This might be familiar to some of you. He grew up as the son of a very prosperous clothing merchant, a buyer and seller of textiles and fabrics, some of which were quite rare and expensive. And so he lived in his early life, his childhood and his teenage years, a life of great privilege. And it was all that a teenager could ask for. There was abundant leisure time for going out and going on adventures with his friends, getting into mischief, living life to the fullest in all of the pleasures that are available to the affluent and the privileged. And he was right there. And he did this, and he took advantage of every opportunity, and he broke the rules, and he got into scrapes, and he just lived a teenage life that most others were envious and jealous of. And at one point in time, he was managing the stall for his father, selling clothes. And this beggar came up to him and was asking for alms. And like in most cases, not only in Francis's time, but also in our time, the man was shooed away as an inconvenience. He was dirty, he was smelly, he was not good for business, right? When you're a business owner, you don't want those kind of people hanging around at your doorstep. They kind of are a turnoff to the clientele that you are wanting to serve. And so Francis, like a good and responsible business owner, he shooed the man away. Go somewhere else, as is always happening to the homeless, both at that time and in our own. Go somewhere else. Don't be a problem somewhere else. But a strange thing happened. And that strange thing was that Francis thought about that man afterwards. There was some kind of pang in his conscience that was rare. Francis didn't ordinarily think about these things because it wasn't his problem. Just like, for the most part, those who are homeless and destitute are not your problem or my problem. We have our own lives to lead and let somebody else take care of them. And so he couldn't stop thinking about, where does this guy go? What was it that was going to provide for him? And he was overcome, as is thankfully the case with some, especially in early life, who are idealistic and altruistic and not worn down by the cynicism of the world. And he decided to take all of the proceeds from that day's receipts of the clothing sales and give it to this man who was a beggar. So he chased him down, he found him, and he gave it all to him because he was ashamed at how he had behaved earlier. And he came home that night and he had this great story to tell to his father, right? Our kids come home from the end of the day at school or whatever it is that they do, and we say, "How was your day?" And that was the same thing that happened to Francis. And he said, "Well, Father, this is what happened." And he narrated the whole tale. And his father was furious. How wasteful. Don't you know that if people know that if you're going to be soft like that, if you're going to just give away what we work hard to earn, that we're going to get a reputation and other people are going to come and there's going to be no end to the problem that those people are going to cause for us. We're going to have beggars lined up at the stalls. We're not going to sell any clothing or fabric. And there won't be anything left to give if you start acting like that. And Francis was troubled by this. There was a conflict that was rising within him. He knew, on the one hand, that all of the pleasures and privileges and material things that he enjoyed in his life came from the success of his father's business. But he also knew that somehow it had felt wrong. The first reaction that he had given to the man who came seeking alms. And so that tension started to grow. And it didn't happen immediately, but over time, Francis started weighing the wealth that was present in his family and the needs that were present in the world around him, and trying to figure out what he was going to do, what he could do in order to be responsive to the lives of others. And so his famous conversion experience, as the story of his life is narrated, is that he was praying in a church one day, which was not his ordinary custom, apparently. And he heard this voice speaking to him that said, "Francis, my church is crumbling. Repair my church." And he looked around him, and the place that he was in was not really in the best of shape, and he thought that the voice was telling him to do something about that building. And so he went back and he took a whole load of cloth from the inventory and he sold it, and he used the proceeds and he tried to give it to the priest, and that's a whole different story. But that was the last straw for his father. And his father at that point actually drug him into court. Drug him into court for ruining his business. And at that point in time, so the story goes, Francis stripped off everything that he was wearing as a shocking public symbol, but also a representation that he was removing the signs of his affluence and attachment to his family and disregarding them. And from that point on, he was disowned, and he went into the countryside and became, for the most part, like the man who had come to the clothing stall that particular day. And over the course of the rest of his life, Francis embraced this simplicity of life that was based not in the ambition to acquire, as the businessman was encouraging the fishermen in the village to do, but instead was based in trying to be as authentic as possible in relationship with the natural world and with other human beings. And if you are curious to learn more about Francis's conversion, there are an abundance of writings that I'm sure are accessible to you. But this is the man who has come into our calendar on October the 6th that we celebrate. One who, at every cost to his own security and prosperity, embraced instead a simplicity and a rule of life that he developed that ultimately attracted a great following in his time and continues to our very own day to be a model for many people of faith. The current Pope in the Roman Catholic Church has taken the name of Francis. And his formative experience as a Christian was as a result of the rule of life of Francis of Assisi. So Francis is not just some historical figure that might be kind of a pastoral ideal of simplicity in a less complicated time, but he is a model that many people try to emulate even in our own current sophisticated and technologically advanced 21st century. Last week's gospel, I wish, was the gospel for today. And those of you who heard it or remember it will remember that a rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And I won't go through the whole gospel for you, but the end of the story was that Jesus says, "Sell all your possessions, give the money to the poor, and come and follow me." The end of the story, the man went away sad, for he had many possessions. So the tension that Francis felt in his own life was replicated in the life of the main character of last week's gospel, and continues to be replicated in the lives of those of deep conscience in our own time. And it's funny to me that sometimes a person will go on vacation to a very different cultural context in another part of the world, one that is much less materially developed, with much less infrastructure, with much less of all of the things that have been built up into the culture and society that we enjoy living in. And they will come back and they will say, "You know, it was amazing. Those people there, they had nothing. They were living essentially in poverty, and they were so happy. I just couldn't get over how little they had, but how much joy was exhibited in their lives." And I'm the kind of smart aleck that upon hearing such a thing will look the person in the eye and say, "Are you going to move there?" Sounds great. I mean, it sounds like that was a transformative experience for you. You want that life, right? And the rich young ruler went away sad because he had many possessions. And you might say, but Garrett, that lifestyle is not practical. You know, I mean, that's fine to say that, and it was a genuine thing, and there was no hypocrisy in it. But I'm responsible for others. I'm responsible for maintaining my household. I'm responsible for my career. I'm responsible for the payments on my car and my loans and debts. And, you know, yeah, you are a smart aleck to just suggest that I can drop all of it and everything that my life has built up to this point and that I worked hard for and that I've invested in, and just trade that for some life in a dirt-floored village in some other part of the world. And as I reflect on the life of Francis, it leads me to think about the choices that we make. And the choices that were being prompted to the man in the small village who was a fisherman, about all the things that he could do in order to build up a great and prosperous and complicated empire. And I think about how we make choices when we buy property. And some of us, we go to get a loan for that property, and we ask the mortgage broker, we say, well, how much mortgage could I get? And they give us a number. And on the basis of that number, we think, ooh, I could go out and buy something for that amount. And then we take on the payments that are corresponding to that amount. The mortgage broker didn't say, you have to borrow this amount, but we choose. And we go to the auto dealership and we look at all of the different cars and we look at their features and they're really cool. And then they tell us what the sticker price is, and we negotiate a little bit, and then we get a loan, and then we make part payments, and we choose that. And in all or many of the other things, not all of the things do we get to choose, but many of the other things, we construct for our own choices the obligations that we have. And the situation that we find ourselves in of all of our responsibilities and all of our commitments and all of the things that we need to maintain and be good stewards of come because at one point in time, we embraced the opportunity to take those things on. And so I started by saying that I would tell you two stories and then end with an elaborated question. And the question is, what do you want? Not what's shiny or what somebody else might be impressed by, but what do you really want? What do you want to be committed to? What do you want to be attached to? What do you want to be the evidence of your presence in this world? And after all of the pitch of this very, very successful businessman who had this corporate office in the big city and all of these subsidiaries of his business, and he explained the end goal to the fisherman about how he could live this life of leisure in his retirement, the fisherman simply looked at him and he said, "That's what I'm already doing right now. Why would I want to do all that other stuff?"
Garrett?
What?
This one. I have a.
Perfect. All right. I'm just going to put my hand right with yours on this picture of Crystal. Thanks to God for Crystal and for the life that comes from you and for the love and joy that life brings. Please bless Crystal and always remind her family of their sacred responsibility and care for all of us. Let their devotion to her and the joy that they experience together be a reflection of your love. Amen. Thank you. So may the peace of the Lord be always with you. Peace be with you. And to all of you joining us in home, peace be with you.